Tom, what are the limits of free speech, do you think?
Well, I think this is a really important question, and thanks for asking me to come and talk about it, just because I do feel like we've been playing the free speech debate kind of on easy mode for the last couple of years, just because of how crazy things have got. We're in the often quite comfortable position of only having to defend people who actually have relatively respectable opinions. Such is the age that we live in. The great heresy is to suggest that there are two biological sexes. Such is the age that we live in. You have university academics, people like Neil Thin at the University of Edinburgh, who got suspended for opposing racially segregated university events, for opposing them. And of course, we live in an age in which to criticise and to mock gods and prophets, or if we're being honest, one specific god and one specific prophet, is punching down and can get you menaced for doing that, even though, as my friend Andrew Doyle likes to say, you really can't punch much higher than heaven. But this is such an important issue, is that we need to really get down to brass tacks, because of the fact that our commitment to freedom of speech is really based on our willingness to uphold it in all circumstances. And for me, therefore, freedom of speech is, in essence, has no limits. I think we need, the test for freedom of speech is very much one about sticking up for those that we most virulently hate. I think Noam Chomsky, who I doubt will be quoted favourably for the rest of this conference here today, put it very well, which is that freedom of speech is the freedom for those we despise. And I really think that is the test. And therefore, with that in mind, I think it's important that whilst we might be accustomed to sticking up for respectable people, we need to really steel ourselves for sticking up for the deeply unrespectable people, for people whose views we hate, for people who hate us in return. And I think what that means is making clear that when we talk about freedom of speech having limits, the only limits we're talking about is when speech ceases to be speech and becomes something else. So when you incite violence, when you defraud someone, when you lie on a tax return, those are not speech crimes, those are crimes that involve speech. And I think that's something that we should make abundantly clear. And any attempt to encroach upon freedom of speech beyond that is something that we really shouldn't tolerate. And I think the urgency of this is really important. First of all, because, and I'm sure many of you have heard this point before, it's been articulated by many brilliant free speech defenders over history. If you do not guard even your enemy from censorship, you create a mechanism that will eventually reach you. That's something that's been said time again. Ira Glasser, former head of the American Civil Liberties Union, a great hero of mine, had a great analogy for it. He said speech restrictions are like poison gas. They seem like a great idea when you've got your enemy in your sights, but then the wind changes direction. And I think that's something we've got to bear completely in mind. But I think there's a secondary reason why it's so important today, which is that the people that we're up against don't just want to introduce kind of neat, specific restrictions, caveats, carve-outs for freedom of speech. They're rubbishing the idea in total. So if we're talking about Islamists, if we're talking about extreme identitarians, they don't just think that freedom of speech has gone a bit too far and it needs to be hemmed in. They reject the concept entirely. They see it as a kind of Western colonialist myth, that it's just there to amplify the voices of the oppressors and put the boot on the neck of the oppressed, effectively. So I think every time that we concede the principle, we fuel their narrative, which is that when people stick up for freedom of speech, they don't really mean it. That it's basically just a way of protecting them and their friends and people who look like them. So I think there's a doubly important reason why we need to stick up for freedom of speech today. For me, the main battleground, therefore, is that we really need to make abundantly clear and be unabashed in saying that hate speech is free speech, as difficult as that is to swallow sometimes. That sticking up for free speech means sticking up for the genuinely extreme, offensive, hateful, and that it is a profound moral error to think that you can challenge bigotry through censorship. I think that's something that we've got to make clear all the more these days. And with the recognition that this is about our ability to be able to take, say, the disgusting anti-Semitism that we've seen spilling out onto Britain's streets in recent weeks after the pogrom in Israel, and say we want to know who those people are, we want to know what they think, precisely so we can challenge them. And that's really important. So, in sum, we need to stick up for freedom of speech with no ifs and no buts. We need to reject the kind of framing that free speech has limits. We need to make sure that hate speech, make clear to people that hate speech is free speech and there's a reason for that. And also we need to, get off easy mode effectively and start having some hard arguments again, I think.
Good. Thank you, Tom.